Cheryl, I got to know Cheryl through AIR. Cheryl is an editor, a storyteller, and a mentor who has reported throughout the United States. She edited a Peabody Award-nominated audio documentary for a public radio station that was entitled Gospel Roots of Rock and Soul. And she edited the audio version of the Reveal investigation, All Work, No Pay, that was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Perhaps most notably to us, Cheryl edited and wrote for The Daily World in Opelousas, Louisiana. She is now based in El Cerrito, California, working independently on multiple podcasts and documentary projects. This month, NPR Music released a 3-hour documentary Cheryl edited, hosted by cellist Leyla McCalla, about the influence of Haitian culture and music on New Orleans. So we're going to listen to Cheryl talk to us for a little bit, and then we'll follow that up with some questions. Welcome everybody to the Rural Radio Collective, and you're welcome to put any issues or questions in the chat.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say if anybody's interested in adding your location to your name, that can give me and Cheryl and everybody else a sense of where everybody's coming from, which is always really fun. So without further ado, here is the wonderful Cheryl Devall.
Oh, thank you. Hey, everybody. It's very good to be here. I enjoyed working with Avery. If you haven't yet checked out the Where the World Begins, what a great name. Please do. It's lovely. And I really appreciated your watchfulness and your stillness. And stillness doesn't necessarily mean dead air. You've got great nat sound in it and a very even keel way, a manner in your delivery that I very much like. And that had nothing to do with my working with you, and I trust that most of you, if you have been involved with this group for a while, monitor or hang out with each other virtually or however you can manage. Because especially now when we can't hang out in person, it's wonderful to be able to keep each other's spirits up, to critique one another's work, and to listen. And I'm going to return often to the idea of listening. It's maybe the most important thing we do, because all communication begins with that. By way of brief further introduction, and thank you for it, Avery, I want to just offer one other thing, and it's from about 2013. It will help explain how I got to Opelousas, but also a little about me that my resume really doesn't get into, and that part is fine. I just have to make sure I've got I need to, hold on. We're all figuring this out. I need to share my screen. And it should speak for itself. I was visiting Southwest Louisiana for something I really like to do. And please let me know if you can hear.
It's the last day of the festival, and Cheryl Devall has one goal in mind.
I'm going to dance as much as I humanly can. I have run into some of my favorite dance partners, and so I'd love to get a few more spins around the floor with them.
As she moves from stage to tent, she stops often to greet people she knows. You never guess that she's never lived in Lafayette. She's got Louisiana connections. Her father is from Baton Rouge, and her mother's family is from New Orleans. But a Navy life took them to San Diego. Her dad is a musician, but Devall didn't get her love of South Louisiana music from him.
He gave us a wonderful appreciation for music. There was always good music in our home. What skipped my generation was Creole and Cajun music.
As she focused on college and her career as a public radio producer, dancing was not a big part of her life. Then she discovered what she calls a hobby.
And about 1997, I was living in Miami, and in the fine print of the Miami Herald Entertainment section, I saw that some of the best known bands from these parts were going to be playing. So I went, I followed my ears. I sat on the bleachers watching this dance floor jump. I mean, it was like walking through the door of the Savoy in 1937 and the Basie Band was on. I mean, I don't even remember which band was playing at this festival, but I hadn't seen anything like it.
That may have been one of the last times Devall has sat on the dance sideline. When was your first visit to Acadiana?
Probably about 1999. And it was right about this time of year. We weren't at this festival, but we did go to Gino's Fan Day. We went to Slim's. We went to Grant Street, I think.
She's been back here too many times to count. And as she's gotten more into the music and the dance, she's also started to enjoy some of the other fun parts of the culture.
With a little more flounce to them. Multiple pairs of boots, you know. I mean, this hat, okay? It's the kind of thing that...
And Devall says she knows she'll keep coming back, even though she's not from here.
I will always remember that I'm not from here. I have wrestled with how to categorize myself, because for better or worse, my brain tends to go like that. And the best I can say is that I love it like a daughter. You know, like a daughter who's been away. And something in it feeds me. And I can't quite put my finger on what, but it does. And it's so doggone hard to sit still to this music. So, whoops. So that's a little about me that may help explain how I got back to Opelousas. The first 2/3 of my life, I was extremely boring. You know, I was a very dull teenager. My parents trusted me, and I didn't even have the imagination to betray that trust. And so I kind of went on college, grad school, internships, jobs, and work took me to Louisville, Kentucky, and I covered a lot of the area around Louisville, and including in southern Indiana, Chicago, some more Midwest rural stuff when NPR was much, much smaller and less complicated than it is now. Miami, and some interesting side journeys for work to farming Miami, or farming South Florida and rural parts of the state. The farther north you drive in Florida, the further south you are. And during that time in Miami, in particular, the last 3 years of the 90s, as I said in the video, I realized a couple of things, that I really finally could get up and shake that thing, you know, in ways that made my mother just shake her head, say, I don't know you anymore, which was kind of fun. It took until my 40s, you know, to get her to say something like that. But also that I loved the physical activity. I liked the socializing. And I realized that getting some kind of rhythm within me made me a better editor. And then I stopped caring about that part of it and just thought about the fun of it. And that was great because it wasn't about mastery. It wasn't about what was in my head. And it put me in contact with people all over the place. And the other thing about Miami is it's maybe an hour and a half flight to New Orleans. And Lafayette's a 2-hour straight drive along I-10 west of New Orleans. So I was going back and forth there a lot. Mid early 2000s, I was editing in a I was editing in a public radio station in Los Angeles that was becoming a real newsroom for the first time, Southern California Public Radio. And a couple of, my supervisor and another editor and I, basically we built that newsroom, and I gave it 7 good years and was burnt to a crisp afterward and left and found out that the 11 years at NPR, the 7 years at Southern California Public Radio, 3 years at Marketplace, blah, 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 really did not do very much for my marketability. And I was out of work for a year, looking. Finally, I said, I need a break. And that's not anything I would have said in my younger life. And because I've been going back and forth to Louisiana, I have friends there. And I said, I'm gonna take a month and just go there and not sit around waiting for the phone to not ring in Los Angeles, where I was living at the time. Found a house sitter, put some stuff in my car, drove 2 miles north to the Crenshaw Boulevard exit off I-10, hung a right and kept going until I got to Louisiana. And it was a really good month, although Mardi Gras froze much the way it did last week. Nobody was out and around, but I was hanging out, hearing a lot of music, seeing a lot of people I knew. And one of them was someone I knew from before, Debbie Elliott, who, if you don't pay attention to her work, she's wonderful. She's one of the few NPR correspondents who has never messed with her twang. And that is so important. If it's going to be national and public, it needs to sound like all of us. And Debbie was in Lafayette to talk to a student journalism conference. And she had contacted me even before I took this little trip, this little break, to ask me, okay, where can I eat? And so I knew she was going to be there. I said, remind me why you're there again. And she told me. And I said, who do I call to get into that conference? Just to kind of be there and also to spend more time with her. Story short, a lot of media folks from that area were at that conference. And while I didn't expect it, one of them called me about a week before I was going to drive back to California. And she said, my city editor in Opelousas has given his 2-week notice. Would you possibly consider extending your stay? Maybe 8 weeks while we look for his successor. I had no good reason to return to Los Angeles, so I said, sure. And it was grim. It was a tiny newsroom, 2 reporters on a good day, 1 photographer, a circulation manager, and a really grungy office. But I could use the money, and I said, why not? And about 4 weeks in, I got in touch with that regional editor. It was, the paper there was Gannett owned, and the large paper was in Lafayette. Opelousas is about 20 miles north and a galaxy removed from Lafayette. Lafayette's a university town, a lot of tech, a lot of, there's a FedEx office in Lafayette. There's a Starbucks across the parish line to Opelousas, and it's none of that. Opelousas is maybe 15 to 20,000 people, surrounded by a lot of ag land. Horse culture is really big there. Sugarcane is one of the big crops, along with rice, along with farmed crawfish. And it was, like much of the state, materially poor and culturally rich. And 4 weeks in, I said, I can handle this. I really, and they hired me. Because it was a small newsroom, I wrote a lot. And I mean a lot. And because I had worked in other Southern places, and Southern Indiana is in some ways as South as it gets, I was able to, it didn't freak me out to be there. And I also really, really wanted to learn more. And there was a generosity of spirit among people that allowed me to say, 3 syllables out of my mouth, and I'm not from there. But when you go and you stick around and you listen, people tend to give you the benefit of the doubt. And I also had a secret handshake that I had never really thought about before. And it wasn't that my parents had eloped from Baton Rouge in 1957. It was that I had gone to Catholic school for 12 years. I don't think I've said that as many times before or since I lived in that part of the country. If you're in Utah, it helps to know a little about Mormonism, about the LDS Church. And the southern tier of Louisiana is culturally Catholic the way Utah is culturally Mormon. In Utah that you're not going to be able to go and buy beer or wine on a Sunday. Whereas, in Louisiana, most of the time you can go to the drive-through daiquiri stand, and as long as the paper's on the end of the straw, it's a closed container. And so, nobody asked how Catholic I am. I consider myself a recovering Catholic, but there are things you just know. And because I wasn't from there, I also had the license to ask. And this is the part of what I'm going to say that underscores the listening, but also, reminds me why I loved it so much being there. People took their time. They loved to talk, and I was always able to learn something new, and they were willing to give it. And the thing I want to mention about that is even if you've been in a place for a long time, don't assume that everybody who's lived there a long time knows everything about it. Some of the best stories came from people with long memories, who have seen changes and can help describe them. And some of the kinds of events or milestones that might seem run of the mill anywhere else are not necessarily. They can yield some real gems. I remember, well, because people would either call or they just walk into the office and they'd assume that all the editor had to do was listen to them. I remember one time I got to the office and there were 4 people waiting and to talk to the editor. And each of them had a damn good story. And in one case, a pair of sisters called to let me know that their father was about to turn 100 years old. And I thought, oh man, these days a lot more people are turning 100. And city me might have just kind of brushed them off very politely. But right before I did that, they mentioned that until he was 95 years old, their father had lived on the farm where he was born without a telephone or air conditioning. Imagine that in sticky, hot, humid South Louisiana. And they had me. And even though he was not in a position to talk anymore, they moved him to the nursing home, and this was around 2014, and he was seeing family, but he was not the interviewee. The sisters and their husbands came by and just told me stuff, what it was like to do the laundry by hand and put his overalls through the wringer and have people watching them hang these heavy things on the line, say, Posha, poor baby, look at how hard they work, how they grew stuff, how they made their own ice cream, how he was a really good chaperone. They'd go to the church dances and he'd wait for them until they were done and bring them home, and on and on and on. And it turned out to be a really lovely story about the way things had been, about a life, a hardworking, full life, I think was the headline. And all these things used to be common. Everybody used to live that way. And even in St. Landry Parish was the name of the county, that's what they're called in Louisiana, where there might not have been a Starbucks, but there was a Walmart, and there were a lot of things that you didn't have to do by hand anymore. It was an opportunity to really dig into what life had been like. So listen to the elders, make time, think about what's different for them and how things aren't the way they've always been, And as somebody now in my 60s, yeah, I've got a sense of what's here, what we consider status quo now and what's different. I remember payphones and dial phones and not having a computer in your hand, or in your pocket, and maps and all kinds of stuff. And taking the time to try and remember that, or tying it even to, like during the time I was there was a lot of emphasis on Civil War history, etc. And, so it's okay to look for those hooks and to listen and to not necessarily go with your assumptions. The other place to really pay attention is to the younger people. Talk about run-of-the-mill stuff, and when we're able to see one another in person again, but even virtually, I bet there's really cool stuff happening at science fairs, middle school science fairs. People who are innovators who are connected with the world perhaps, and who may have thoughts about, okay, how much of my life am I going to spend here? What do I love about it? What makes me crazy? Do I want to leave? If I want to stay, how am I going to stay? If I want to go to college, how and where? And all of those, or if I don't want to go to college, how am I going to make a living? Oil and gas, working offshore used to be, or has traditionally been, a really big deal, a big jobs creator in Southwest Louisiana. Long haul trucking also. And because of technology, because of renewable energy, because self-driving vehicles are on their way, all of those anchor jobs are going away gradually, but they are. And so thinking also about who is going to do those jobs, who's going to innovate their replacements, and who's going to help steer the economies where it needs to go, who's going to assure that rural broadband becomes a real and widespread amenity, a utility, as it should be. And what change is that going to bring about? You know, those are all the kinds of stories and ideas that you can listen for wherever you may happen to be. And I think that the pandemic has underscored so many divides, including the rural-urban divide, including who has access to information, to the kind of money that allows people who, I mean, San Francisco is emptying out to an extent. Once people figured out, oh, I don't have to live here. I don't have to pay these rents. Rents are down. I mean, Peter, am I right? You know, and maybe not far down enough so that there are fewer tents pitched under the overpasses, and that's crazy. But a lot of people with disposable income, with real savings, with generational wealth that's been passed down, are leaving, and the real estate market in some of these places that used to be considered out of the way, it's burning up. I'm wondering how many of you might already be writing about that, or, you know, somehow recording that. So during this time, that may be a test for us, but really reminds us that we're not that special, because every generation has its hardships and its trials, and we're human beings, and we're going through one, and maybe one of many, as the climate changes, as demographic shifts happen, you know. But noticing all that, noticing how the life where you are may change, there's just a lot that, you know, that's there to write about and to pay attention to. And because I am, you know, because I still had a house in Los Angeles, and the house sitter, who was a newly minted PhD and doing adjunct teaching a lot of places, had assured me that she could at least cover my mortgage, and then ended up not being able to. I had to, after about 18 months, return to LA. I asked my supervisors if I could return to LA and go handle that and then come back. And they said, we can give you an unpaid week off. And I said, I'm going to need more time. So unfortunately, my time in Opelousas ended on that note. And weirdly, Gannett did not hire another editor. You know, I said, I'm going to reapply for this. I want to be here, you know. I really enjoyed the work. A lot of the stories I wrote, Gannett shared across its network. You know, these are the USA Today people. So, but the flip side of trying to commit good journalism in a very local place that is quite different from the nearest large city, is not in Gannett's business plan. As I speak, there are no full-time employees at the Daily World anymore. There's a lot of wire copy. The paper is no longer close to daily. At the time I was there, it was 6 days a week. We didn't do a Saturday print edition. Now there are 3 print editions a week. And it breaks my heart, because anywhere you happen to be, people deserve to have themselves reflected in good stories. And I'm not just talking about upbeat stories. You know, if there was a boil water order, we had it in the paper. And there was no local news radio, and the newspaper out of Lafayette and the TV stations out of Lafayette generally didn't cover that kind of thing. If there was, there were just so many good reasons to have good journalism there. I'm not saying I was great or perfect, but the people I worked alongside were very committed. And while some have moved on, the photographer, who, except for a couple of years in the Air Force, had not left Opelousas, you know, and he's saying, I don't know what I'm gonna do, you know. And it's a damn shame, because everybody knew him and he knew everybody, and he was largely my other secret handshake, you know. If Freddie could introduce me, she's with Freddie, she's all right, you know. And so, you know, the other part of my story about what happened in Opelousas is replicated all over the country as small news organizations disappear, or their corporate owners shut them down or cut them back, to the point that even the longtime subscribers just say, what am I paying for anymore? Because you are radio or AURAL storytellers, there are a lot of ways to leap past that. And I'd love to hear how some of you are trying to figure it out. One of my goals right now, or 2 goals right now. One is to document some of what I've been telling you. I have a small group of women friends. We workshop each other's writing and meet every week via Zoom. And I'm several chapters into a book that I hope will be a mixture of memoir and media criticism. Here are the kinds of stories that happen in places like this, and here's what it means to have good local journalism in a place that a lot of people would ignore otherwise. But the other goal I have is to move back down that way, in part because the Bay Area, lovely as it is still very expensive. And while I'm, doing okay, I could do much more okay. Let's just say the exchange rate in Southwest Louisiana is very favorable. And so I hope to return there. And, yes, continue to do the contract work I'm doing with various podcasters and radio documentaries around the country, but maybe also get on the local NPR affiliate every now and then, which does not have a local news department. It is very music oriented, but some of the programs I listen to, and I'm a member and I stream it, and there's 7 hours of Zydeco and old school R&B every Saturday. And that is very much my CNN. I find out who's sick, who's passed away, who's engaged, who had a baby. The two older gentlemen who do the early part of the day were talking about, oh yeah, I got my Moderna shot and I didn't have any side effects. And if you're a certain age, you really ought to think about getting in line for that. And there isn't another place there that's going to tell it to them, and certainly not in Creole French. And they code switch between the two all the time. And that's the kind of, that's part of the beauty of the other medium we're all in. I go back and forth between print/text and audio storytelling. And, they're doing a public service because not an awful lot of other news, or a straight news organization might not be telling folks, okay, you got to go get your blood pressure checked, and there's a fair over here, and it's not going to cost you anything, or it's sugarcane harvest time, make room for the trucks. Don't try and speed past them. They're putting your food on the table, etc. So that's a little bit about, where I've been in the perspective that, living and working in a largely rural area has gifted me with, has allowed me to develop. And I'm eager to know if any of that resonates with y'all. A chapter I'm working on, by the way, is claiming my y'all, because I grew up speaking very properly, and there's room for that. I can say y'all and speak job interview. But I'm eager to field questions if you have them, or just, there's a bunch of us here and with a lot in common, I suspect. So
Thank you, Cheryl. That was wonderful. It's so wonderful. I feel like you have such a gift for delivering a good story from all of your years of editing. I love the way the waves, kind of intersect all over the place. It's really great.
That's one phrase for it. Thank you. That's one way to put it. And I do think, even though it's no longer the main reason I do it, I do think that, learning to dance didn't hurt my sense of rhythm when it comes to how to pace a story. Anyway.
Well, if anybody has a question, I think the best way to go about it is if you could just raise your hand,
Mhm.
either physically or with one of those reactions in the bottom right side of the bottom little panel there.
Okay.
Don't see any hands yet. Oh, wait,
Hey,
I do.
Rob,
Rob, go
how
for
you
it.
doing? And where exactly? I can only see so much of where you are.
So, excuse me. So I am currently in Peabody, Texas, which
Gracious,
directly
how you
relates
doing?
to the question. I'm sorry,
How are
what
you
was that?
doing?
Oh, I've been fine with all the weather, but that's actually related to my question. So Beedies is a town of about 400 people outside of College Station, Texas.
Mhm.
This past week, during all the weather events that Texas had going on, my town was under a boil notice that we didn't know about for about 3 days, because none of the surrounding area media reported on it. We don't have a newspaper. We don't have, I mean, the nearest television news station is over in College Station, about
Mhm.
45 minutes away.
Mhm.
This wasn't reported anywhere. And when our mayor kind of got after the utilities company for not telling her so that she could go out and let people know, they said, oh, well, it's on our website. So I suppose my question is,
Right.
how do we help people understand, whether they're businesses or media, whatever it may be, that not everyone out in rural areas is just going to go check their utility company website? And how do we share these messages to people that are maybe otherwise underserved by media that only have so many hours in the day to share whatever stories they find most important?
One possibility, I mean, and a lot depends on, how much people use these. I have an older one, but I don't leave home without it. Texting, some kind of a text service or a grapevine effect like that strikes me as probably the most effective way to do it. And it could come from the utility, or, and this is going to take some work, but you know how we used to organize phone trees if we wanted to, or if we wanted to alert each other. I think that it is possible, say you, some people maybe each of them try to um, corral 2 or 3 households or 2 or 3 other people they know, so that, I mean, it's shocking that the utility didn't mention it, but first thing to do is say, all right, we're not going to let this happen again. And when you are aware of that, I mean, cultivate somebody, even crappy little local offices of utilities tend to have a spokes or a public affairs person. And this is where that handmade network would likely have to do the job that that a dedicated media organization would have to do. You figure out who to talk to in the volunteer fire department, who to talk to, with whatever law enforcement is happening, whatever, and the utilities, and just work those contacts and say, listen, this happened. We can't have it happen again. This is where letters and letter writing campaigns still matter. And in some ways, and this is, I mean, there's been research on this. When there is not a local news outlet, civic engagement suffers. And as we all saw in Texas over the last week, when you leave everything to the market's not going to take care of people. So that's where some of what you do is going to have to be unpaid, and it's going to have to be intense, and it's going to have to be communal. But largely because of the technology that's also made it possible to work from wherever we happen to be, there are ways you can get the word out. And, you know, you might not have the authority to do the equivalent of an Amber Alert, but you can do a text. It really struck me, and when I found out that the first place to get real penetration when phone answering machines came out was Iowa. People were out in their, you know, they were out farming, doggone it. They weren't in the house all the time. But those machines were really, really helpful. You know, and even if not everybody embraces a technology, in general, a lot of people do. And if they don't, their kids and grandkids do. And this is one of those ways that you can energize and foster connections between younger and older people.
Right. So I guess you're saying we should put the onus like on the community. We should work together rather than waiting for the media to come along and do it for us. And maybe get some of those same like skills and ways of thinking about civic engagement out to the public in general.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for answering the question. I really appreciate it.
I hope that never happens to you again, but if it does, it's the beginning of a roadmap, and
Absolutely.
It's something I think you can talk about with, you know, with people you know who are as concerned as you are.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
I see that there's a follow-up. Oh God, the pros and cons of Facebook. Ooh-wee. I used Facebook a lot. I'm not on it now, in part because, at least for work, I don't have to be, but certainly as a way of spreading, another way of spreading the word. You know, I mean, I talked about texting, but social media also, you know, is useful. And you also do that understanding that part of the message you would send out over, say, Facebook or Twitter or Instagram would be, if you live with somebody or you know somebody who doesn't have access to this technology, holler, let them know, call them, text them, do whatever you have to. Yeah, very often local organizations will post stuff on Facebook. Some municipalities do it. School districts do it. I found that, and Alexander, I see that your hand is raised and we'll talk in a moment. I found that it's also a good way for connecting people. I mean, there's a lot about Facebook I don't like, but I would also share stories to stories we'd written to people who might potentially be interested. There were some public interest stories and also some pretty awful crime stories. A local priest who was from Nigeria and ministered to 2 congregations and then returned to Nigeria, taught political science and was stalked and killed by people who didn't like his politics. And I ended up sending that story by Facebook to a lot of Nigerian news outlets. I know it's weird, but knowing that people in St. Landry Parish missed the guy, they said, and a lot of Catholic outlets. It's also a good way to find out about people who may either need help or who are victims of crime, because suddenly the outpouring of tributes tends to happen on Facebook. And you say, hey, I'm from the Daily World. If you want to tell me a little more about Trey, I'm here, and it's a shot in the dark. Everybody, I'm still amazed that anybody wants to talk to journalists at all, but it is another way of doing that kind of outreach. And it has much to do with meeting people where they are.
I know you kind of have to split at 2 o'clock and it's 2:01, but I just wanted to say we are so grateful that you spoke to us. I can't speak highly enough to everybody about how much you helped me with my rural storytelling project. Your compassion and your ability to give feedback in a thoughtful way and make me think about my community in a more meaningful way was huge for me. And I'm just so appreciative of everything you have to offer. And I think you offer such a unique sense of compassion that I really valued. So thank you so much for coming here today. We are super grateful.
What I could, my email, I'll put it in the chat. In case you all want to follow up for any reason. And 2 things that I'm glad to be around for, I've got a sense of humor and a thick skin. And so bring it, and thank you for your attention. I hope you all stay well and warm if you are in a warm place or in a cold place, and comfortable if you're in a hot place. And thank you so much. This is beautiful.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl.
Keep making good stories, keep listening and keep talking with one another. All right.
Thanks so much. Well, we'll stay in touch, and thanks everybody for coming today. We appreciate you being here.
Yes, indeed. So long.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.